Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about fun. I've already done a video, and I'll link it below, about balancing fun and realism in games, but I've gotten a lot of fun oriented questions. People want to know what I think about fun versus balance, what I think about games that force you to go what the designer considers to be the fun path, or just what is fun, define fun. I'm going to take a stab at it, same way I took a stab at defining what an RPG is. Let's see how this goes. First of all, let's talk about fun versus balance. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised that I prefer fun over balance in any of my games. And you can even see some of my games were really unbalanced. Sometimes certain skills or certain classes you could take were just a lot easier than others. I don't think anybody thinks the Nosferatu is easy to play in Bloodlines. A lot of people think the mages are much easier than gunslingers in Arcanum. But notice that doesn't talk about whether or not it's fun. It's talking about whether it's easy, which opens another can of worms about skills and what people think is easy versus what other people don't think is easy. But let's just look at balance for a second. I think balance is really, really important if you're making a multiplayer game, whether it's PvP or not. If a bunch of people are playing together, if it's PvE, player versus environment, it's really not fun if one of the player characters can have a lot more fun than another one because they're either because their skills are more broadly useful, or they picked a class that's required and everybody wants them, or any number of reasons. And if it's PvP, balance is probably the most important thing. Because if you have players attacking players and you have one class that can trump every class, or you have one skill that is unblockable and beats everyone else, everyone's just going to take that class or buy that skill. And then that kind of defeats your whole purpose of having a bunch of different classes and skills. So I do think balance is important in multiplayer. But in single player, not so much. I know people will go, but that will leave, people will find ways to play OP. Okay, that's fun. And people go, well, they'll find ways of min-maxing their characters. Great. If you found some way of putting together a really unusual character that has a huge damage output, or barely can take damage, or can kill things in one hit, great. Similarly, if you make a really cool, we used to call them glass cannons, where you make a character that has a high damage output, but if it takes one hit, they're dead. Some people like those. It's a challenge. It's like putting your game on high difficulty or Iron Man mode, knowing that you're playing a character that has this huge restriction. I used to play in GURPS. They used to call them Johnny One spells. It was a mage who put all of his points into just one spell. So maybe you could cast Flame Jet, or maybe you could cast, an ice explosion spell or something. But you put all your points into it, which meant you were really, really good at casting it. You never missed. It always went off. It didn't cost a lot of mana, etc. You cast it quickly, etc., etc. It's all great until you walk. If you, say you pick Flame Jet, it's great until you run into a fire elemental that doesn't take any damage from fire. Well, guess what? That Johnny One spell is useless. So I get why people want to talk about fun and balance, but if it's a single player game, I don't really want to dictate to that player what fun is. I don't want to tell them how to play the game. That's the whole point of me talking about player agency and player choice and consequence. I'd instead go, have fun playing the game, and half of playing the game is not just exploring the world, but is exploring the mechanics. And if you find things in the mechanics that you find especially fun, great. Now let's talk about forcing the fun way. People were talking about games that the designer obviously thought a certain way was the best way or the fun way to play, and they make you play that way. I think if you watch any of my videos, you're going to know I hate that. I do not like forcing the player to play any way. That's why I allow people to kill everyone without even talking to them. It's why I try to do pacifist playthroughs. It's why I make sure that no matter what skills or classes you buy, your character can still finish the game. It may not be easy, but for all I know, you find some unusual way to be fun. So who am I to tell you, no, play this way, this is the only fun? If you played my Temple of Elemental Evil game, you know that when you end the game, there's a bunch of different things you can do at the end. Did you kill Zuktmoy, the queen of fungi? Maybe. Maybe you killed her because you were good. Maybe you killed her because you were evil. But maybe you were evil and you joined her. Maybe she was wrecking you in the final combat and she said, join me or die. And you're like, okay, I'll join. Why not? That's what an evil group might do. Or maybe you were so evil and you were crushing her that maybe she decides to give in to you. She'll surrender to you. She'll be your vassal. Why not? That sounds like fun. It's probably really unbalanced because if we had a sequel to Temple of Elemental Evil and you had Zuktmoy as a party member, okay, that's going to be a little unbalanced. But it was a fun way to end the game. I thought it was great. Similarly, I did a video on quest markers. Some of you hate quest markers. You're like, I hate it. I don't want them in my game. It takes away all the joy. You play the HUD. You play the UI. I get it. It's a totally reasonable thing. Then some of you required them. You're like, look, I don't have time. I work a full-time job. I have kids. I sometimes won't play the game for a month at a stretch. I need a quest marker to tell me where to go. If you don't provide them, I move on to the next game. Totally reasonable. Now, I thought a reasonable compromise was to make them an option. And then many of you pointed out, and I think it was totally good thing to point out, that if you make it an option, it's harder to playtest a game. I agree, because now you have half the playtesters have to play it with the quest markers on and the other half to play them with them off, just to make sure everything's still doable. But it also means that the quest should be solvable without quest markers, meaning the quest giver tells you enough information that you could go figure out how to do the quest, and that information is put in your journal so that if you come back to it the next day or the next week or the next month, you still have that information. Some games get around that by just recording every dialogue you ever have. And so there's a tab in your journal called previous dialogues, and you can just scroll through transcripts. That's a great way too, especially if it has search in it. I prefer, though, it to be linked directly to the quest in the quest log. We kind of did that in Arcanum. So to me, that is about the only way to achieve consensus, is to have optional quest markers and really well defined quests. So you don't need them, but if you want them, they're there. Because any other decision is you telling the player, here's how you are going to have fun. Now, that probably brings me around to what's fun? What is fun? I struggled with this, and I just did the one about, the video about how to define an RPG, but I struggled with fun. It's like a lot of things in life, it's really hard to define fun. The same way it's hard to define happy. A lot of kids are happy, but if you ask them why they're happy, or even that they are happy, they don't know. They just are happy. Similarly, you're playing a game and it's fun, and if someone says, why is it fun? Define why it's fun. I don't know, it's fun. I often fall back on that famous definition of porn, which is, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. If you haven't heard this, here, like Tim's story time. Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said the following line about obscenity in a case he had to look at in 1964 about a theater showing a movie that the local officials thought was pornography, and they stopped him under Ohio's obscenity law. And here's what Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said, quote, I shall not today attempt further to define the kinds of material I understand to be embraced within that shorthand description, and perhaps I could never succeed in intelligibly doing so, but I know it when I see it. I'm the same way about fun. I've played a ton of games. I know what fun is. I can tell when a game is fun. I can tell when a game isn't fun. But I probably can't define it. I certainly can't give a really shorthand description of fun in a way that hundreds or not thousands of you could not rip apart and come up with counterexamples. So I'm not going to try to do that. But what I will say is this. Ultimately, whatever the game director or lead designer thinks is fun, that's what's fun in that game. the reason I like emergent play, and I'll link that below, is sometimes fun is somewhere no one thought of. It's at an intersection of a bunch of roles, and fun comes out of it. So while ultimately I think the game director is the person responsible for fun. So in other words, they'll take credit if you think if you think a game is fun and spread it among the team, but they'll be responsible and take the blame if you don't think it's fun. Ultimately, I think whatever director thinks it's fun is what's fun. It's probably not the answer you wanted. I think it's the best answer I can give. So that's fun.